So I played golf last week, and it wasn't during a weekday, so prenez ASN, it's on a Saturday. It's very tempting where I live, which is Las Vegas, to play golf on a weekday. And I practiced in the range, right? It was perfect. Like my drives are going like 250 yards, and my wedges are accurate. And I felt like Tiger Woods, Let's get this going. So I went to the golf course, and it was terrible. The wheels came off. I pulled my drive to the left and went to the driving range. I flew the green. It was terrible. It was like one of the worst rounds. So what happened, and why is this important to scaling AI, right? And things work well when you have a very controlled environment, or when you have a POC, a proof of concept, a small-scale pilot. But when you try to scale it, it's like me going on a golf course, right? Everything's different. Why is that, right? And how many of us had small algorithms that was proven on the data set, but it didn't get scaled, right? For whatever reason. Anybody? Sits on the shelf, right? And there are a lot of reasons for this. No one's had this experience. Just me? Oh, just me and Lana. This happens a lot, right? And why can't we scale? What are the inhibitors? What are the challenges of scaling? That's what we want to talk about. What's a framework to think about it? And I'll talk about it from my experience, but also have distinguished panelists that I'm going to bring up after this to talk about their experiences. Okay? So how do I get this? There we go. Okay, great. So there's this thing called AI paradox. Everyone like the robotic arm there? Okay. So it's really easy to launch AI pilots and see good results, but it's deceptively and fiendishly difficult to scale it and move past the pilot stage. What are some of the reasons why, right? First, lack of clear AI strategy. This was a little bit controversial when I talked about it with my panelists. They disagreed. But we came to an agreement, I think. What we mean by this is that you need to have an air cover from more senior levels, right, to make sure that you have the organization aligned, that when you have cross-functional use cases, that you're able to bring people together, right? And that's extremely important, especially nowadays where we're trying to exploit the richness of internal data that sits across silos, right? Second reason is that the priorities are not aligned and use cases are not aligned to the priorities, right? So I'll tell you a little story about this. It's meet Edward, right? Edward was a bright young analytics person hired to run claims analytics, and he was enamored with analytics, and he wanted to make a difference. And Edward's first use case was applying deep learning to claims adjuster notes to predict customer satisfaction. Great use case, he thought. He built a great model with limited set of data, showed it to the customer experience executives, and they said, Edward, great job, but we can't use this, right? Your model is a black box. It doesn't give us any insights for us to act on, right? This model went nowhere, right? It's kind of like me on the practice range, went nowhere, right? Of course, didn't get funding either, right? So what happened here? Well, if Edward had discussion with the customer experience executive and knew what they were looking for, what the problems were, he might have used a different technique that was a bit more transparent. And I'll talk about that in a little bit as well, in a case where it really worked. So aligning the use case and priorities, very important. Legacy infrastructure, I'm sure many of us have experienced this. The traditional database systems cannot support AI. It's got limitations, unable to support unstructured data, like videos, images. There's size limitations, there's column limitations, all sorts of limitations, right? Ineffective governance frameworks. So data governance, good example. Who owns the data? Who is responsible for making sure it's clean and it's accurate, right? Decision-making governance, right? Who has decision rights over privacy, for example, PII, right? Well, who's making sure that we're complying with the regulations? When there are tough decisions to make in terms of what direction to take, even what AI use case to solve, who has those decision rights, right? Needs to be clear. And work happening through silos, right? So in insurance, you have claims kind of building their own models, underwriting, doing their own thing, marketing, customer experience, and so forth. And when you try to bring it all together, it's very difficult, right? Because each of them has their own teams, their own mandates. And how do you make it so that it's cross-functional, right? There's some insights coming out of claims that might be leveraged in underwriting, for example. Some marketing that you want to do that you may want to temper based on what kind of risks do we want to take on, right? So they need to inform each other. And a big one is next best action. So if you have a customer that are touching you through these touch points, what do you need to do as a next action? It could be a sort of a marketing pitch. It could also be solving a claims problem, or it could be offering a new product, right? So it needs to kind of come together. The budget concerns, right? Some of the pilots could be pretty cost-effective, but when you try to scale this, right, the cost can be astronomical. And so how do you show ROI to counter that, right? And appropriate skill set and talent gap. There's a talent war out there. I'm sure all of us are feeling it. There's lack of people that can run and manage these type of projects. And people are resorting to various different sort of ideas. One insurer I know opened up an office in the Silicon Valley, right? So that's where the talent is. And they have scaled up very nicely that office and opening up centers across the globe. And lastly, this is a key one. I don't know if you can read this. But organizational culture and employee perception. So how do you make sure that you have data-driven culture? How do you make sure that you get over the fears of employees who may feel like they don't really understand AI, and is AI going to take my job, right? It's a real concern, both for the employees and the management. So, given all these challenges, what can we do to overcome this? So, we believe that there is a framework of 5 elements that make up enterprise AI strategy, right? And enterprise AI strategy is made up of 5 key elements, right? First of which are making sure that the use cases have ROI, have a shared vision across the enterprise in terms of attacking the most important problems, right? The art of the possible that AI brings, but also clear ROI and shared vision to achieve the ROI, right? One example is that a large P&C insurer, first thing they did was build analytics roadmap, right? This is where they interview 60 executives in terms of what is the area of biggest need, what's our business strategy, how can AI help, and what data do we have. In a nutshell, you get a roadmap that everyone agrees on, that organizations are aligned, both at the hierarchical senior and junior levels, but also cross-functional levels. It's extremely important that the buy-in is there so that whatever the use cases get kicked off has the support of the right stakeholders. Tech stack. So a big part of this is making sure we have a scalable, agile platform, right? And as part of it, that we have the right big data. All right? The data in terms of content, velocity, veracity, and variety, but also ability to manage and handle in a flexible way the big data that's being generated. And being able to leverage open source tools and technologies so that it can be maximally exploited. And cloud is a big part of this picture because cloud gives you flexibility and agility, and also a lot of the security and so forth is for you to scale much easier than you can on your own, right? And then one of my favorites, human capital, right? Scaling AI is not just a technical endeavor. It is having the right operating model, having the right set of skill sets, ability to focus on which skills do you need, which skills do you want to outsource. One insurer I know, they thought long and hard about this, and they said, of all the tasks that have to be done, we are going to focus on algorithm building, right? The data engineering, the visualization, and so forth are peripheral, and we are going to work with vendors for those two tasks, working with our team that does the algorithm and data science. They had a clear mandate and strategy, and that worked pretty well because everyone knew exactly what was expected, was a core competency of this organization, and who's going to do what work. So that was very important. Another organization really focused on making sure that the training and the professional development was there for the hundreds of analytics folks they're already there and about to grow, right, significantly. And there was a very deep thought or thorough thinking done to figure out what's the right training to provide, both internal and external, as well as the career progression. So the operating model is really important, especially as we try to attract this new talent, usually the millennials, that have these technical skills to join an organization. I think various different types of industries have different challenges, and everyone's competing with the big tech, right? So the Facebooks, the Googles, Amazons are trying to lure these talent away. But I think the other industries, I've seen where they are able to hold their own, in terms of challenging work, better lifestyle, right, and the ability to have a big impact, even if you're not in tech. And the culture is very important too. So I mentioned earlier, having a data-driven culture and executives who are comfortable and understand what AI can do, AI can't do, is extremely important because they're the ones who'll be, making the big decisions in terms of which use cases are doable and which will they green light versus not. And this sort of Analytics 101 is something that is extremely useful at all levels of the organization, but also at the most senior levels, right? So they get comfortable with analytics and data. Fourth item, DevOps and business integration. So this is where rubber meets the road. This is where once you've developed the algorithm, figured out how to scale from technology perspective, have the right skill sets, and how do you then put that into production, right? Both from software and software development perspective, as well as process change perspective and design. So I know Bijou is going to go after this on design, so I'm not going to steal his thunder. But this is where a lot of the projects can fail, right? Because you might not have the right buy-in, from the users. One example I can give you is that a large P&C insurer, told me that, hey, we have great fraud models, right? Claims fraud is a big issue. Billions of dollars are spent on fraudulent claims. And we built a great model that the adjusters can use. Problem is, they refuse to use it. Well, why is that? Well, they've done this for 30 years, and they're not going to trust any machine over their experience, right? They're set in their own ways. The machine will give you prioritized ABC. They want to do X, Y, and Z, right? So how do you get over that? And how do you make the interfaces easy enough and the process changes seamless enough for this to happen, right? And lastly, and maybe one of the most important things is governance. And I mentioned governance earlier, but especially with security and compliance. In many of our industries, especially in financial services and insurance, this could be the number one important topic in terms of how do you protect PII, right? How do you make sure that you encrypt and make sure you understand the regulations and you're compliant to it. The other part of governance is obviously, benefits realization, cost management. How do you show value? How do you make sure that you're funded through the benefits rather than this becoming an sort of academic exercise. And so when these elements come together, it's a beautiful thing, right? I'll give you one example. There was an insurer who wanted to understand what was the driver of customer satisfaction, right? Kind of similar to this Edwards story I told you about earlier. And they took a very different approach. And it was different in two ways. One is that they used a technique called Bayesian belief network, which shows you in a very business-friendly way what the drivers of satisfaction are. Not only that, it can quantify the impact of each driver. And not only that, it can give you indirect drivers as well. So one example is this analysis found that one of the top drivers of satisfaction is being on hold, right? When you call about your policy, you don't want to be on hold for 5 minutes, right? That's a big dissatisfier. And they also found that that element, if it's over a certain number of minutes, will have 3% drop in NPS. They also found that the hold time is directly correlated to the staffing, right? It's obvious, right? It's obvious, but not so obvious in terms of quantifying it. So if you don't have the right staff in your call center, your customers are going to be on hold, and it's going to drive your NPS down significantly. The other driver was website. Website was not navigable. So people were dropping off. There were like dead ends on their websites. And the third one was that their agents were not knowledgeable enough to explain the products. This became a problem because they're paying a lot of premium. They want to get the right information about their policies. And so what this company did was they lined up with these very actionable insights, the various channels. So they work with the website owners, IT, to have better user experience, better navigability, better navigation, and make sure there's no dead ends. Number two, they work the call center, obviously, to address this issue of long hold times. And then lastly, they did a better job. They rolled out a training program for the agents. The ones where they felt was the least knowledgeable, there was a training program. In a nutshell, they had insights that were actionable. They lined up all the right parties. They took action. And their NPS went up by 600 points in 1 year. Right? That's where all these things kind of came together to scale the insights, whether it's the website issue or the training issue or the call center issue, to really deliver real results.